So if a man is going to build, then to whom is he supposed to pass on what he built? There's no reason to pass it on to other men's kids, especially the kids of the men that are having the majority of the kids in the neighborhood now. You see, the issue we have in the community is that everybody ain't an ignorant savage, but the ignorant savages are having the most kids. And there's no reason for me to build something and I can't have kids, but I build it and I pass it on to the kids of the ignorant savages. Even though a lot of them aren't going to grow up to be ignorant, only a few will. But that few that grow up to be ignorant like their fathers are going to be the ones that have the next generation. The problem is that we do have our women funneling all of the DNA through the worst of our men. We got too many of our women doing it. It ain't got to be all of them. The fact is we have a critical mass of them. And there's no reason for the rest of the men to build anything. The ones that are in the middle of the spectrum, the ones that are Pookie and Ray Ray, but they're not idness, there's no reason for them to build unless the women think that they're idness or the women don't care that they're not. And this is exactly what African American women who do like idness guys are expecting the men they never wanted to do for their kids by the idness men they did. Build, accept all the responsibility, none of the benefits, including busting splendiferous nuts in Big Booty Brenda. It does come down to sex in many cases, as well as respect and everything else. This still stares us in the face in the end. We can't run to other communities. This is true. Ask the Indians that have lived in Africa for generations and don't know India anymore. Black Africans who are always there can't expect equal treatment from them. What do you think whites will do if we try to move into their communities? But we can't build and stay anywhere where spear chuckers like Eric Holder are an influence, especially since most people in any zip code aren't like him. So why are they looking up to him? Why does he have any influence? No matter the zip code's income average. The issue isn't that many people are ignorant in these areas. The issue is that the ignorances have the sway even in nicer black areas because they also aren't shunned, especially by the women, no matter what they do. And guys who aren't ignorant are assumed to be the opposite extreme, wimps and pushovers. And I know because they're looked up to by women in neighborhoods like where I grew up, which was a nice one, still is. Because these idness were seen as being authentic and real niggas despite being of no value to the race in any zip code. I recall one who sold drugs in my neighborhood and he didn't sell them in the neighborhood, he sold them elsewhere, but he lived in my neighborhood, he grew up in my neighborhood, nice area. He sold drugs and he bought the house next to his parents, and there were stories about him and his girlfriends. As far as I know, he's still locked up, but I could be wrong. And also ask LAR Movement about the time he spent in Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The inmates were called from the parish jail a few blocks away to talk to female college students. He mentioned this so that when they got out, they already had somebody. Now, the reason they kept doing this is because it kept working. Bottom line, the guys who describe themselves as being out of the community might not be able to just leave, but they are right that they have no incentive to stay and build, as Cynthia G says she wants them to do. In the end, these guys challenged to build are in fact expected to still do more in exchange for less from the women around them. And this still reinforces to these men that at a reptilian level, these women have determined that these men are genetically inferior, and it's because of trouble into which they didn't get in the eyes of white folks in the legal system that they're genetically inferior, less manly. There are no reasons for the most constructive of any men to be loyal to a community like this. If they want to have kids to which they can pass anything, they must marry non-ADOS women. And we know those women can't marry any ADOS man and remain in the community. So you see, the African American Muslims faced a similar issue. There were African American women in the Muslim communities in the U.S. And like the men, they brought in some ignorant behaviors. But as what usually happens, the worst women would bring their crap to the best and most patient guys. So a lot of these men divorced these women and they went to Morocco. Morocco became a popular place to go. Then other guys who had never been married started following them because that's the closest Muslim nation to the USA geographically, with the exception of Suriname in South America. They married women who they thought spoke Arabic and were largely resistant to westernization because they weren't marrying the westernized women from Morocco. They were passing them up. The African American women saw these Moroccan women back in the communities in the U.S., and there began to be instances of them even beating these women, although they were rare. But what was not rare was that they did not welcome these women. African American ADOS women were not welcoming these Moroccan wives of ADOS men. So some men began to say that our solutions weren't in between the legs of Moroccan women, but actually they were in the end. I married one later on. And the reason we're not together are legal reasons now. It ain't got it, we didn't fall, we weren't incompatible. It was legal problems. In all honesty, she treated me better than I had been treated by almost any one of our own, with one exception. Truth be told. She was a widow. She had kids, but she didn't see me as only good because she had kids. That wasn't the way that worked. I can honestly say that had we met beforehand and she did not know that I was an American, I could have told her I was from Belize. I can honestly say that had we met before she met her husband, I could have been her husband, her first husband. So I found out what it was like to be equal, treated equally by an attractive black woman. That's when I found out I had to leave the U.S. So in the end, the solution actually wound up being, for many guys, in between the thighs of Moroccan wives. The kids came up and they performed better academically. They fought less, and they were usually bilingual, at least speaking both English and Arabic better than either parent. They speak English better than the African-American parent and Arabic better than the Moroccan parent, because Moroccans don't speak Arabic that well. In the end, one thing I never heard of was a Moroccan wife cheating on her husband. I'd heard of African-American women being faithful and cheating, and I'd heard of this with the men, but I never heard of a Moroccan wife cheating. And of the couples I know, none have divorced. I'm the only African-American I know that married a Moroccan and then divorced, and that was for legal reasons. Usually when you bring a non-Western woman to the U.S., she changes, and this is a known phenomena, leading to divorce and alimony and child support from a woman you didn't expect to drag you through this. However, I know of only, I know that the Moroccan women usually did not do this even after they came to the U.S. So when the African-American woman complained about it, my answer was, well, why don't you marry a Moroccan man instead of complaining about African-American men? I thought it was due to hypergamy and the U.S. passport being stronger. Nope, it turned out that Moroccan men who aren't black or don't know they're black won't usually marry an African-American woman. They might marry a black woman, but not African-American. Because one, usually they don't want to make their children darker than themselves, but that's about half the time only. And two, most of them don't trust or expect much from African-American women to begin with. It won't work. So some men and women would say, well, why do you have to be selected by women to build something for the community? And that's a good question, but the answer should be self-evident. For myself, if I'm not selected, then I only need to build for myself, and that does not require as much to build. But if I can't have my own children, then why build for others' children? That is a question with which I can answer the first question. And if I can't have my own children, and I'm not talking about just me, I've got mine, but a lot of other brothers that because they're responsible, they're not picked. If they can't have their own children, and I mean have their own children with a woman before she has other men's children. If they cannot have their own children and have their children be their wives' first child, then why are they required to build for other people's kids? Especially the children of the men who were not required to build in order to have their own children. You see, what's really going on is that question being asked is really only being asked to shame such men into thinking that it's perfectly okay and even manly for them to have to build, to not get what other men got without having to build. We can't go to other communities except temporarily to trade and for business, but we will have to build an improved place in our own communities or new communities. And there won't be enough ADOS women to marry and keep it going without marrying other women of color. I don't suggest marrying white women. They're dangerous. I know that. I'd bet money on it. But we would have to understand this, that when it comes to building, the men that you're looking at to build are going to have to marry non-ADOS women. They can marry black women that ain't ADOS, or they can marry other women of color. But what must be understood, black women, is that it will have to happen. They can't marry a lot of you because you ain't going to go for them. And the only way that can change is for ADOS women to change their mate selection preferences or disobey them. And we can't expect or force women to do either one. And we don't think that we should have to expect or force women to do either one. We should not have to try to shame them. We're allowed to address it, but we shouldn't expect the women to force themselves to go against what they think is their nature. So what this means, sisters, is that a lot of you who can't tell the difference between a normal nice guy and an outright wimp, you've got a problem, and you're going to continue sharing the same few men. And as you share these same few men, you're going to have to accept the consequences, and you're going to have to accept that some of these guys, if they do come back to build, they're going to be married to non-ADOS women, and they're going to be passing on what they've built to children that have a mother from somewhere else. And you're just going to have to accept that, because we don't have the right to tell you what to like. You're right, we don't. So we're just going to have to go ahead and bring in women from elsewhere. And you're going to have to deal with it. Because BGS is right. You can't just leave the community. And I realize we can't just leave it. We can build something different in it, or a new one, but we can't just leave the community. I get it, especially to go into the white community. That's not going to happen. That's very true. But we can bring, and actually we would be forced to bring in women, preferably of other colors, but forced to bring in women from elsewhere with whom to raise our kids. Because no, we who build should not have to accept having to be stepfathers to the children of the men who didn't have to build to get the same draws. Yes, most of your value is in between your legs. It's not your only value as women, but that is a lot of your value. And if you're going to wait until you've been stretched out by some other guy's kids to give a responsible man a shot, you're saying to these men, you're inferior. And that's why we're giving you extra work in exchange for less. That's the real truth of the matter.